There's a word in Swedish that I don't like. It's also one of these words that I don't think exists in that particular way in that many other languages, and things like that are always interesting to me because I think they say something about something else. And this word that I actually had thrown at me, weirdly quite a lot, growing up in Sweden is helsvensk, which means fully Swedish. And my experience was that when people realized that you didn't fit, or your background didn't quite fit with this word, no matter how you looked, really, there was this maths that had to be done about how many percentages you were not fully Swedish and how exactly those percentages were to be divided. And you just got a lot of questions about your background. And questions about background can be, as we've seen today, quite tricky to answer. And I personally would end up just saying something along the lines of, my family's from Eastern Europe, hoping that would end the conversation because it became shorthand for, well, we've moved a lot because that's just the history of that region, as it is of many other regions in the world. We've migrated, and also the other experience of migration, which I don't think there's a word for, at least not in Swedish, which is you stay, but somebody else moves the border. And so you don't cross the border crosses you, and then what do you become, and what can you see from the other side of it? Professor Gurnah, you write in your novel, By the Sea, I'm a refugee, an asylum seeker. These are not simple words, even if habit of hearing them makes them so. Would you say it's a fair description to the audience and the people watching at home who might or might not have read your novels, that that is, to a large degree, what your writing has been about?
Well, not entirely, in the sense that it's not the only subject or idea or topic that I write about. Mm-hmm. But certainly in that book, it is very much about the condition of being a refugee, and that warning, I guess, that habit of hearing them makes it seem as if we know what that is. In reality, of course, what we do know is often a misrepresentation of what it is like to be either a refugee or an asylum seeker. Mm. And I think everybody who comments on the condition in which people find themselves in is keen to demonstrate that, to show how and in what ways that, shall we say, that popular image, which might be because of the photographs, which might be because of little clips of film on the news and so on, that doesn't really describe the condition of being a refugee.
Mm-hmm. So you first set foot in the UK, where you've now lived for 5 decades. Was it Gatwick Airport?
Actually, I don't know.
You don't know?
I mean,
I read that it was Gatwick Airport, but
well, I don't remember whether it was Gatwick or Heathrow. Oh. Because in the confusion of arriving, you were more sort of like, well, it was a long time ago as well. But I remember the confusion of arriving. I'm not sure there was Gatwick or Heathrow.
Okay, but you were 18?
I was 18,
It was 1967?
That's correct, yeah.
You were fleeing Zanzibar, which was this frightening place at the time, with your brother. And there was a confusion, you say, but I've also heard you talk about that we have this way of describing the arrival to to Europe as this kind of confusion that never ends, and that is a bit of a colonial, or it is a colonial trope, that people come and sort of the experience of arriving, European culture, Western world is so overwhelming that these people find themselves forever displaced, right? And that's not the case, because your writing often emphasizes the resilience, right?
Yeah, when I say confusion, I remember in the novel I'm writing about somebody who's 65 years old, who has been through many things, including imprisonment, including various, loss of beloveds and so on. I was 18. Yeah. I knew nothing. I hadn't traveled anywhere very much outside of East Africa. Yeah. And I came completely unprepared in that sense about what it was that I would find. Even if you think it's a different world in a way, I think now. When I left Zanzibar, we didn't have television in Zanzibar. There was very, very little publication available as a result of the restrictions of the post-revolutionary government. So really the only thing I knew about Britain or Europe or whatever were bits and pieces gathered kind of haphazardly here and there, maybe something from the cinema or a photograph or something like that. Whereas today, if there would be the internet, you'd have been seeing things on TV, you probably would have had shared experiences of others, because so much has happened in these 50 years when it comes to these movements of people to Europe. So the confusion was perfectly, I think, forgivable or understandable, that you arrive, you think you know something, because we were just only recently still a colony of Britain. And so you still have those stories that you've been told as a colonized person. But this, of course, is not the reality when you get there.
What is the reality when you get there?
Well, the reality is far less straightforward and clean, and it's far less friendly, should I say, far more hostile, a little bit colder as well than you imagined. Yeah. I think it was more or less, really, it should have been expected, and I'm sure my colleagues here will have had similar experiences too. Being a stranger is alienating. Yeah. And being a stranger without experience, without skills, without a job, without money is different. I think if you're going somewhere as a properly prepared person, perhaps with skills, with a job and so on, or you have experience of travel. When you don't, it's quite a frightening thing to be in a strange place. So I think it was, wherever it was, it probably would still have been alarming in various ways. What was, I guess, more alarming in this case is because I thought I knew something about it. And then you get there and find that, in fact, it's quite unlike. Worst of all is that you can't understand what people are saying, even though I thought I could understand English, but I couldn't understand what people were saying. And they called me names, frightening. So it's those kinds of things. And when you're like that, I keep returning to this idea. You don't know how to go into a bank. You don't know how to go into a cafe. You don't know how to do all the simple things that would make you not kind of feel as if you're standing out as a stranger, to do those things that would make you disappear into the community or into the society. Everything was. And so probably this way of responding to everything, if anything, probably drew attention rather than if you could just crawl around, as it were, and hide.
So you were 18 and you're saying you were completely, or you were unaware of what you were going to, but were you aware of what you were losing?
No, well, that's the other thing, I think, when I started by saying what the condition of being, well, shall we say dislocated person? We don't have to say always refugee, because there are different reasons for being dislocated. But when I said that it's not always, that kind of popular idea does not take account of the condition. One of the most important things, of course, is that what has this person lost? What has been left behind? Which is very much in the mind, I think, of that person, but not always in the mind of those who are looking on.
Was it in your mind when you were 18?
It was terrible. Within minutes, I was thinking, what have I done?
Professor Patapoutian, yeah, I thought about your lab when I was listening to the Dream Orchestra earlier, or I've never been to your lab, but you told me about it yesterday very kindly. And the Dream Orchestra here with making music with all these people with different stories and from different nationalities, that was a bit how you described your lab to me yesterday. Because there are very many migrants in your lab, and there is more failure, I think, in science than in music. But apart from that, there's something similar there, right?
Absolutely. I think in science we enjoy this wonderful coming together of people from all around the world, and we share the migrant experience. And I think in return we get a lot back. Not only their different points of views, what they bring to question with different backgrounds and different thoughts and different information. But I feel very special. I mean, anytime in my lab, there is probably people from 8, 9 countries. And it's not just what immigrants bring to science to me, it's also the opposite, in the sense that, you know, I was Armenian origin, born in Lebanon, came to US when I was 18, and there's this strong sense of not really belonging anywhere. And I think when I first started working in a lab and experienced this international community, I often say that I found my tribe, and it's the tribe of science. Yeah. And so I think that's the kind of what I get from it, is that this wonderful belonging, because we're all, and this was said actually very eloquently, we're all different, but we're also very similar.
So how would you describe the tribe of science in an anthropological way?
A bunch of misfits,
yeah,
who think differently and like to enjoy life and do things their own way, and are mainly curiosity driven. I guess those are some words that come to mind.
Your own experience, you also fled with your brother, and you were also 18, from Lebanon, and you came to California, right?
That's right.
And you were working all kinds of job for a while to get residency and to get an education. You were delivering pizzas, correct? And you were also, and this is the bit that interests me, you were writing weekly horoscopes for an Armenian newspaper.
That's right.
That is the most fantastic gig, right?
It is. It might disappoint some people who read this to know what's coming. But one of the editor came back from a party and said, I met this lovely old lady who said, you know, I'm encountering the same horoscopes, and I guess the typesetter was just recycling them.
Yeah.
So he asked me to just come up with some fresh material.
Okay, and did you... Sorry, I will move on eventually. But did you look at the stars, or?
No, I think you get in the habit of trying to write things that a lot of people can relate to.
Yeah.
But I was also trying to play this game where I would try to give advice to my friends.
Yeah.
And tell them, read your horoscope this week.
Oh, okay. So it was.
But then I actually realized that the typesetter didn't care what I wrote for each month and was just randomly
They just moving
putting
them around.
So it didn't make sense. Again, sorry to disappoint people who follow
yeah.
this.
Okay.
It was great fun.
Yeah. Okay. So, Professor Chu, you're a Pisces. You're born in February. You are born in the USA, as Bruce Springsteen put it. But you are of Chinese background. And you're somebody who's obviously a Nobel laureate, but somebody who also moved into politics. You were Secretary for Energy during the first Obama administration. And you are also living within the tribe of science. Do you agree with this description about the dream orchestra of the labs?
I think the idea of a bunch of misfits who do what they want is an accurate description.
And do you see yourself as a conductor then?
No, I see myself solidly as a bunch of misfits.
There's no conductor.
There is and there isn't. I think in a well-run lab, there is. It's very flat. One tries to teach your students and postdocs that the mentor is actually one of you as well, and then when you go and you brainstorm, you try to establish the idea there is no rank. The rank is just your ideas, and I think this is something we all cherish. That all of a sudden it's flat. There's no the boss and the second boss and everything else.
Has it become more difficult to gather this tribe of misfits from all the places of the world now because of the political rhetoric and what's happening in politics around migration issues and migration legislation and visa legislation? Has this become a problem for science?
It is becoming a problem. To be candid, it's especially becoming a problem in the United States. There's been a political backlash that says, I think it's not, this part's not unusual in the United States. When people's lives on balance are not getting better, then all of a sudden they're getting unhappy. And what I see around the world, and including the United States, is someone rises and says, okay, your life isn't getting better. Your children's lives may even become worse than yours, and I'll tell you who to blame. And the immigrants would always be the first. And then you also want an external enemy, and so the United States is generating, it doesn't have to generate very hard, an external enemy. And so what has happened is this great mixing pot of the United States, where its entire history, I should say its entire history of Europeans settling in the United States. There's a deeper history, of course, but its entire history of people coming to starting with Europe, but all over the world, was one of the United States' great strengths. The other great strength of the United States is quite often first generation, but almost assuredly second generation. You will never be asked, are you American enough?
Yeah.
You could be fifth generation in Sweden, or Switzerland even more so.
Switzerland even more so, yes.
That you might always be regarded, well, you're not completely Swiss.
Not completely.
Okay, but if you're born in the United States, the acceptance and the attitude of the American people in the past has been so good that way. And so, although my parents grew up and they were feeling a strong amount of prejudice, and if maybe people don't know, but the anti-Chinese part of American history is not a good history. It goes back 50, 80, 100 years, China's Exclusion Act, things like that. And I thought that was all past us until recently, what's been going on in the last decade.
Yeah, because now you are living in the US, being born in the US, but you have Chinese heritage, you've worked, you've been in government in the US, but the relationship between the US and China and the rising tension there is probably the defining geopolitical difficult relationship at the times of our time. How does that affect you?
Well, I've been as active as I possibly could in trying to put some calm in this and some rationality, and to try to remind the United States that without immigrants, U.S. science, U.S. technology, U.S. many, many things would not be where it is. And that was a large measure of the success of the United States. And to see us forgetting these important lessons is very tragic. It's not only tragic selfishly for the United States, But the fact that you can have scientists from different countries coming and crossbreeding, going and studying different places, working in different places, and this international stamp that we all bring to each other, and know that we've lived in different places and been educated in different places, is a form of diplomacy which is hard to turn your back on unless you're driven by times of short political expediency. You want a new enemy. And this is very, very tragic that politicians are feeding on that.
Yeah. Professor Gurnah, who does the English language belong to?
Well, languages don't really belong to nations, if that's what you mean. Certainly English now has become, I mean, American, to go to the United States, I believe now, even if you want a resident card, you have to be able to speak in English. Certainly to become a citizen, you have to speak English. And no doubt if you're willing or wanting to operate in the world as a businessman or whatever, you need to have English. So it's got beyond, I think, if we're talking about English, maybe true of other languages where people are still fighting to either keep them alive, say, for example, or to give them a breath of life because they feel, they're being swamped or being, prevented from functioning. I would say, for example, my first language, Swahili, people who speak it, particularly in the heartland, as it were, are very nationalistic about it and constantly are trying to think of ways of promoting it and keeping it alive and so on, in the way that Britain does not really bother to do with English because it's not necessary to do that. But the important thing, particularly when it comes to literature, I think, rather than using language for instrumental purposes, it makes sense for instrumental purposes. Everybody speaks more or less. You can operate with English. But when it comes to literature, then I don't think it matters too much. Because in a way, I can read translations and, that's fine, Russian, French or whatever. It doesn't bother me. I don't think to myself, I'm reading a Russian or French translation. So I don't think with literature it matters so much. It's really up to the writer what language, works for him or her. What is the language he or she feels closest to. And this can be a complicated thing. It's not just a matter of experience. It's not just a matter of what you've lived through. It's a matter of something much more intimate than that. It's like which instrument you play if you're a musician. It's not a matter of this is my born language as well, my first language, I must write in that. You may be no good as a writer if you write in that. But you might be lucky enough to have a particular kind of ear for another language in which you might be able to write beautifully.
Which you found out that you had for English.
That's very kind of you, thank you.
Well, I think a lot of other people have acknowledged that as well. Professor Patapoutian, are you worried about your dream orchestra in the lab? What Professor Chu was talking about here, the rhetoric around migration in the US, the policies that are being put in place. I mean, I live in the UK right now. The British government has found out that Brexit didn't work in the sense that it actually seems to have increased migration into the country. So they're trying to sort of limit numbers. Are you worried for science?
It is certainly something of concern, both from I think a policy general level to individual levels. There are people in my lab, including from China, who are worried to go back because they have to reapply to be able to get in, and there's no guarantee, and they don't know how long it will take. And so some haven't gone home for years and worried about this process. Again, that's from the individual level. From a more general level, and Stephen mentioned this, is immigrants have impacted so many areas, but science especially. I think there was a statistics that for Americans who've received the Nobel Prize in chemistry, physics, and medicine, 35% are immigrants.
38, I think I saw, yeah.
and I think just this last year, 6 out of 8 who were American were immigrants. So those are very interesting numbers, and one can get into why or what is it about it. But the reality of it is that that's a major impact, and we need to make that more visible instead of allowing this negative painting of immigrants coming, taking our jobs, and images like that seem to dominate the immigration concept.
Professor Chu, as somebody who's been in the world of politics as well, do you see any way of bridging this gap, the gap between the needs of the Dream Orchestra in the lab and getting talent in there to play and to solve the big problems we have, and the increasingly dehumanizing rhetoric of politics? I mean, it was said earlier this morning that we're not going to win a culture war, but do we have to, or?
Well, I think one can only try to remind people of what has worked in the past, what is history. You know, there's an old saying, those who don't understand history are doomed to repeat the mistakes. I'm reminded of a favorite cartoon. Again, it's a Gay and Wilson cartoon. There's a fortune teller, not quite.
That's the theme.
Telling a very anxious-looking woman, and the fortune teller is saying, "You will make the same mistakes, not just once, but again and again and again." And so humans have making the same mistakes again and again and again. We've seen this, you know, when economy turns bad, a backlash against immigrants, people not like you, and trying to retreat. But history is that when you have this great mixing pot, it is truly wonderful. And how to remind people of that this is going to be a lost opportunity, not just in science or in technology, but if you think in America, it's not that they're taking the jobs away. If you think of in the Fortune 100 companies in the United States, Elon Musk is from South Africa, Jeff Bezos, I think from Caribbean somewhere. You just go down the list, Alexander Graham Bell, Scottish, you just go down the list of all the people who were the captains of new industries, who started new industries and new jobs. The immigrants played an important role, maybe a decisive role, just like in science. So how could we forget this and just say, no, we have to be, business as usual was in the United States, this creativity, this joint creativity. And it is something we, and again, I'll repeat it, it's the biggest form of diplomacy we had, even the deepest, darkest periods of the Cold War with the Soviet Union. The backdoor channel among scientists prevented Cuban Missile Crisis from really exploding, things like that. That says, no. There were people on both sides that trusted each other. And with that trust, you can build something.
You can build something, and we shall. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening. Thank you very much. Thank you.